It is a pleasure to be here with all of you at Flyleaf Books and all of you on Zoom. Everybody say hello to the Zoom room up there. Hi. Woo! I'm Christy Norris. I'm the director of Carolina K-12 at Carolina Public Humanities. And our mission is to serve teachers in all 100 of North Carolina's counties. If you are a pre-K or K-12 teacher, please raise your hand so that we can all celebrate you. Don't be shy. Can we give these teachers on Zoom, raise your hand too, a big round of applause. You guys, we know these past few years have been the most challenging of your careers in many ways, and so I just want to say thank you for your service. And speaking of educators, this morning we had the most incredible morning with Mr. George Redmond and Mr. Ali Kamanda and Michael Williams, who I'll introduce in just a moment. We went to the wonderful Club Boulevard in Durham, and we have to send a thank you to those wonderful young scholars and their sensational media specialist, Mrs. Elizabeth Husketh. It was incredible, yes. We then ended our morning with the very intellectually furious Carrington Cougars in Durham Public Schools. And I think, frankly, we all just wanted to stay there. It was such an inclusive, beautiful media center. We just wanted to hang out and read all day. But then we remembered we have y'all coming. We were really excited. But thank you to the dynamo, Miss Vanessa Calhoun, as well. The students at both schools just blew us away. And I just want to say their teachers, like you all, are sensational. And so despite the political back and forth that we all hear in the media over public education, there is brilliant work happening in North Carolina public schools. Our future is in good hands based on the bright and curious and creative and amazing students that George and Ali fired up this morning. So know that. I also want to say thank you to the North Caroliniana Society, who through the William Friday Education Initiative and their partnership with Carolina K-12 is providing funding to make today possible. They also so deeply appreciate educators. They're making sure every one of you who teaches is getting a copy of this book, both here and online. And it turns out teachers really love to learn, and you love books, go figure. So they bought 50 books, then we had over 200 people. We have like 100 people on Zoom. And so we then had individual donors say, we love teachers too. And they have donated books for you all. So thank you to all of them. And thank you for asking. Yes, you can still donate if you would like to buy a book for a teacher. So Paul will put some information in the chat about that. Thank you to Flyleaf for hosting us this evening. You can still purchase copies of Black Boy at the register if you like, and these amazing gentlemen are happy to sign for you. It's a beautiful, beautiful book. And so on that note, let's get into the conversation about this book with these two amazing authors. A Black Boy described as a heartfelt love letter and joyful celebration that is for children of all ages 1 to 100. And to lead this conversation, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Michael S. Williams, the founder of the Black on Black Project and our co-sponsor and partner in funding and hosting today's events. Michael's project is really incredible. I hope he'll tell you a little bit about it. Make sure you go and find out about it at blackonblackproject.com. Did I get that right? blackonblackproject.com. And I just want to give special credit to Michael and the Black on Black Project, since it's really because of his leadership that this event was ever conceived of. He came to me and he said, there's this really beautiful book that I think every teacher and student needs to know about. And here we are. So thank you to Michael for that, who won't let me tell you much more about him because he gets grumpy with me when I go on and on about him, but he is one of the most engaging scholars that I have worked with, and I'm appreciative of him for tonight, so I'm going to turn it over. Help me say welcome to Mr. Michael Williams.
Thank you all for being here. And Paul turned the mic on and it's hot, so that's good. I have an affinity for educators because my late mother was an educator in the state for 30 years. Yes. So I have a real affinity for educators, and I was lucky growing up. because I learned so much. And so I want to say thank you to all of you for the work that you do. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the folk who are in our virtual room. I'm going to wave so you can see that I'm talking to you. I hear we have a 70-year educator in the Zoom too, Miss Bertha Boykin Todd. So I'm excited for her to be watching tonight. Black Boy, written by Ali Kamanda and Jorge Redmond, illustrated by Ken Daley, is incredible. And it's incredible for a lot of reasons we'll talk about tonight. It's incredible because it allows us to have points of departure for lots of other scholarship. So that's what we're going to get into tonight. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Jorge Redmond and Ali Kamanda. So we're going to have this conversation in 4 parts tonight, and it's not going to be as long as you might think when I say 4 parts. We're going to talk about self-determinism a little bit. That's in the book. We're going to talk about understanding your own agency. We're going to talk about understanding your feelings. And we're going to talk about contextualizing, Mr. James Williams is going to like this, contextualizing your history. And I think that's really, really exciting. So we'll have a brief conversation, then we'll open it up for Q&A. So if you are in the Zoom, please use the platform to share your questions, and we're going to get to those. The first thing I have to ask you two, and you didn't know I was going to do this, but you're back in Chapel Hill. It's been 25 years since you've been together in Chapel Hill. What does it feel like? And I guess more importantly, how different does Franklin Street look?
Well, we got in late last night, and we decided to embark on Franklin Street, and it was a ghost town, right? But it was like maybe 1 or 2 in the morning.
Yep.
We were still kind of expecting that there'd be some people out, but then again, it was Monday, so it's not like a party night. But our heads were just turning left and right. I mean, I think I might need a chiropractic. All of it turning. It's the amount of buildings, everything up. Some of the staples that we were used to, timeouts, Hectors, all these things that
They got rid of Hectors.
a quarter of a century.
Time out, yeah. What is going on here in Chapel Hill?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, development is going on.
My goodness, it's a little too fast, but hey, maybe we're just getting old, you know?
But what did it feel like though? Even today, it's a nice day, and so I remember probably 25 years ago, y'all were on campus in the yard, and like, what was that like today to kind of be in some of those same spaces?
It was surreal, to be quite honest, because again, I guess, you know, we came into this, onto this campus as young minds, you know, in a sense, feeling like you were ready to take on the world, but not really knowing what the real world was, you know. Thankfully, this was a very good melting pot. So it at least got us to kind of see a lot and start to experience a lot that maybe we're not necessarily ready for. However, coming back now, I think was sort of nostalgic, because I think we could go back and start to look at those lives past, because it's 25 years and we were like, oh my gosh, man, that's a lot of time that has passed. And sometimes it takes moments like this for you to at least recognize your own presence and where you are, you know, right now in your own present, right? And so it's bittersweet, because I mean, we say about the changes, but I think we're still pinching ourselves. We still kind of want to keep exploring more, because you get a lot more of that history that comes back, and you can kind of feel your sense in those spaces and some of those experiences. And there was no place like Chapel Hill for us. So coming back has been a sweet thing, and we're so thankful for this opportunity.
It was great to not have a backpack on, right? No, you know, that sort of pressure of having to go to class, we were walking through and enjoying it, right? The less of that pressure that you have on making sure that your grades are correct, and just kind of soaking it in, because when you're in it, you have no time to really kind of look back and see what's happening. So just to walk through today without the backpack, without the stress of being a student, and it just allowed us to fully enjoy the place that we met, and a wonderful place of, as Ali said, a melting pot for education.
Yeah, you could be in awe. That's a good way to put it. You're right. You get to be in awe of this whole space. And this is what got us connected and what's got us here, you know?
Yeah, I'm excited. I told you in Asheville at the Malaprops bookstore at the opening, we got to bring y'all back to Chapel Hill. And so that was in October?
That was in August. when it launched, Yep.
And so now what month is this? February, right? Almost March. So it's good to finally have made it happen. So let's get into the book. I mentioned self-determinism is throughout the book. Phrases like shine like the sun and shape your own fate. Um, Ali, the concept of self-determinism, I want to start with you with this because you are born and raised in Sierra Leone. You left as you were a teenager, becoming a teenager at a tumultuous time in the nation's period. So I'm interested in this concept of self-determinism that you had growing up, went out, and then coming to the United States. Similarities and differences in those two things, and how your family helped you navigate that.
Well, okay, so yes, born and raised in Sierra Leone. At the age of 13, this was right when the Civil War broke out, which I'm sure everybody now has known about. And so I've always considered myself one of the lucky ones. I was blessed to be able to escape that reality. Okay. But prior to that, though, the thing about Sierra Leone that sometimes gets lost in this narrative, because right now everybody can contextualize it through war and crime. But it was a beautiful nation. It was actually a nation of scholars, all right, especially like my parents. And so this whole self-determinism really comes from, I would say, their sort of struggle to try to make something of the country itself when they were growing up and seizing their opportunities that they had. Because back then, it really was about what were you going to be able to do for yourself to make sure you were able to survive, okay? And part of that had to do with your education. So at that point, in African literature, I know we really felt like Sierra Leone was more like, on that Gold Coast, it was really like the Athens of Africa. There were a lot of people who were actually from other African countries that were coming to Sierra Leone for an education. Then things started to change, and then after that, it was now you needed to seek elsewhere to go get that education. So I remember my parents, in fact, that's how they met. They met here in the US. They were able to get scholarships because they were able to get out. But for them to achieve that, to be able to leave the country at that point, really took a lot of self-determination. Like you had to will it upon yourself to make sure that you could get out. See, the thing about Africa, or even, well, Sierra Leone in particular, that sometimes I think gets lost is, I always say there's no brain drain. I mean, there's just a lot of intelligence, back there, right? What's lacking is opportunity. So for you to sort of connect the two, you really got to believe in yourself and what you're capable of doing in your own capacity to make sure that when that opportunity presents itself, you're going to make the best out of it. And so for us, our parents really taught us that so that we never got to miss those chances. So if an opportunity arose, even if it skips you, you were still going to be able to move with that breeze, because any sort of movement forward, honestly, was a way up. And for us, we wanted to hold on to that to make sure you could actually capture it. Because again, you never knew if it was going to come again. And if you were able to do something, then the beauty about that was you were then able to reach back and help the next person out and to be able to do and achieve something even greater. So it was just the way that we were brought up. And we carried that with us, when we got to the States. And being in here, I'm very thankful. I didn't really appreciate it then. But all the things that my parents would have to say to me in terms of really believing in yourself and knowing what you can do didn't really hone in until I became an adult. But they said all of that through high school, even in college, and it never really stuck, Because when we first got here, I'll be honest, school was rather easy. Because back home, at our elementary and middle school level and even into high school, we were really almost like taking college level courses. I mean, you were really getting prepped for, the best of the best because you had to be on the top. So when we got here, I mean, honestly, we were flagging kids in class. There was no even studying to even get good grades. Wow. It came too easy, which was bad for me because then I felt like I didn't have to work for anything, right? So every now and again, I would escape that, but my parents always found a way to bring it back full circle and just say, no, that's not how we raised you. All right, you got to focus, buckle down, because you got to do this. This is on you. My pops would say, like, I'm always going to be there for you, but I'm not always going to be there. And I didn't know what that meant until I lost him 2 years ago. And so now all of a sudden you start, these lessons that they try to teach you and instill in you don't really hit home, maybe until a particular point in your life. But that's when it actually happened for me. But I'm very thankful for that because now my whole job now is to instill that in my own children.
What's interesting about what you're saying, when I knew we were going to do this, I had to pull I had to pull your buddy off the shelf, Ishmael Baya, and A Long Way
Lion of
Home.
Africa.
Y'all read this? And some of that is in this book. I was going to read an excerpt, but you did it more eloquently than me reading, so I'm not going to. Second thing is, I think about Lerone Bennett Jr., Before the Mayflower. Who's read that book? Hands? Yeah. He starts with Africa. He talks about these scholars and this scholarship that is present. So Du Bois, Lerone Bennett, they all lay that out early on. So we know we have this history way before we get here. And we'll talk some more about that. George, Asheville, North Carolina, the western part of the state. I'm from Goldsboro. Anybody ever heard of Goldsboro? Well, everybody's like, yeah, I have. So in the eastern part of the state, unless you have an educator as a parent probably, you don't learn about the western part of the state. You might learn about Charlotte, but past the triangle, what is there? Asheville is full of black self-determinism in its history. So George, I'm wondering from you, I'm thinking about Isaac Dixon, Hester Ford Lee, Edward Stevens, all of these folk who helped build Asheville, that community. I'm thinking about Dixon Town, which was right over there by Stevens Lee. Shout out to Angel Redmond, your sister, who's doing great work in the community in Asheville. What was it like for y'all growing up, understanding some of that history and having that sort of self-determining mindset instilled in you?
Well, it was unique because we're surrounded by mountains. So we're kind of enclosed geographically. That kind of kept us where we felt like we were comfortable. And so in Asheville, it's not too diverse. Everybody knows if you've been to Asheville, there's the Biltmore House.
Can we just laugh at that 1 second?
But there's the Biltmore House. We grew up, my grandmother was really kind of the help for the Vanderbilts and the Biltmore and all of that. So the wealthy that was there was a black community that essentially was the help of the movie, of making sure that their house needs were met and understanding that role that my grandmother had, and then the value that my mother took in that to instill in her to go to college, North Carolina A&T, so Aggie Pride for her. She got her nursing degree, but she set a standard that was really high for all of us, that she raised. And so it was a unique time for me in Asheville, and the fact that when I was growing up, my name was weird, right? So it's spelled Jorge. And so having that obstacle, because growing up, I knew coming down when the teacher was rolling down through the names that my name was about to come up. And at that time, the Hispanic Latino community wasn't as prevalent as it is now, but I knew that she was going to have trouble with it. I just raised my hand. It's George, ma'am, it's George, and tried to bypass that. And between that, the thought of me trying to get out was really the thought for me. How would I do that? I just had no idea at the time. Luckily, it was the sport of soccer, which is unique because when I grew up, it was only in the South. It was football, it was basketball for blacks. And so we got made fun of, right? You're in short shorts, you got high socks, right? And so it was a struggle within my own culture to try to identify myself. And then I got on a playing field where I was really one of 22 that were out there. So my determination at that point to succeed in both aspects helped drive me to the point where I was fortunate enough to be recognized at a national level, to be able in high school to travel to Germany, travel to Holland, travel to France. So I was able to represent United States at the U17 national level and play for them. But I got to see the world. And that meant so much to me because when I would come back, I would look at my other students. They're still in the class. They have not left the mountains of North Carolina. And I knew so much more by the time I was 18 than I would have ever known. That drove me to continue to want to explore life and continue to want to travel. For me, seeing was believing. And so I could read as much as I wanted, but when I was able to travel, I was able to escape that sort of mindset that I enclosed myself within the mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, and be whoever I wanted to be. So that determination to always reach beyond what I could see to perhaps what I couldn't see is what allowed me to be where I am today.
One of the things in the school visits that we had today, a lot about dreaming, and children are just wide open all the time. Robert Greene writes about the original mind, the conventional mind, and the dimensional mind. And the original mind is like childlike. You can do anything. Mm-hmm. George just said something though, seeing is believing. So you being able to see things, now you can dream, now you can be inspired. And watching those children react to y'all today was really, really beautiful, because people that, this is the book, Black Boy, people that look like them, they're like, oh, I can be an author. Mm-hmm. You play soccer, the real football or whatever George was saying.
Yes.
And it was really beautiful. One of the questions we had that was pre-submitted from teachers was about inspiration and what inspired y'all to write this book. Ali, you start, and then George pick up from there.
The book itself, originally, this was George's idea. But I'll tell you where the inspiration comes from. A lot of times in life, sadly, beautiful things are born out of tragedy and out of pain, okay? So for this, we don't take this lightly. This actually was inspired because we were dealing with COVID at the time, but this was the same time, too, that Mr. George Floyd was murdered, all right? And so here we were, college graduates, married, with kids, you know, definitely in our own way successful in what we're doing, happy in our own homes. And all of a sudden, what became a slogan, I can't breathe, was literally something that you really felt choked up. So it just felt like a collective sense of like being suffocated, okay? And so he and I went back and forth just venting. I mean, we were so angry. And a lot of that really stemmed from the fact that we had two boys who for us are the most precious little spirits on the planet. And so I think it was in a moment of, you don't even want to say panic, but maybe life really taking on a different sense of realism, you know, because all of a sudden it was like, this is really close to home, okay? This was at a moment now to where this has happened. And I mean, the both of us, we live in predominantly white neighborhoods, but this was something that my family was not going to be able to escape, all right? Like, we had to actually address this, because there's no way my son could come home and not see this on my face, even if I turned that TV off. He had to know something was up. What am I going to do, lie to him? No. So these were things we had to have real conversations on. And because we had to do that, but also I got to see that the white neighbors that he was playing with did not have to go through that. Their kid was still happy-go-lucky and just moving up and down, and they were cool, just made me just so furious, right? So when he and I started talking, we just started venting. And it really was something that got very dark in terms of what we were envisioning, because he was like, hey, man, I got an idea for a book. We're so mad, you know, let's write Black Boy, what do you see? I see police brutality. I see institutional slavery. I mean, we were going down the brown bear path, but everything that you can think of that was bad was all that we could list. And we were doing it just kind of like this. We were having fun with it, you know, but all of a sudden it was like, brother, we got to hold up for a second. This is getting very dark, you know? And the whole idea behind this was, we need to actually create something because we want to inspire, because we want this to be for our children, right? So not take them down the dark path. Let's actually shine some light on something. And so then we started rifting back and forth as to how can we manifest this? How can we transform this anger and this pain into something that was going to be uplifting and hopeful? And this is how the book came about. And I'll let you continue with that one.
Yeah, so before I went to law school, I used to teach, and I was a Title I teacher. And so I remember used to asking kids, what is it that you want to be in life? And I kept hearing baller and rapper. And I was like, oh my God, like whatever happened to everything else? Whatever happened to being a banker? Whatever happened to be an accountant? Whatever happened to be an inventor, a doctor? Everything else. Why is there only a 2-track system of success for young Black boys? And it just got on my nerves. And of course I asked my son, and he was like, I want to be a soccer player. And so I was like,
yeah, I wonder where you got that from.
And so between those conversations that I had with kids and my current occupation at the time, I was a juvenile prosecutor at this time here in Asheville. Again, I've already talked to you, it's not too diverse there. But unfortunately, what I saw come through the juvenile justice system was astonishing. The amount of Black individuals being swept up in the system. And then if I ever got the chance to speak to them, the same sort of thing was that they didn't have any goals outside of being an athlete, right? Or being a rapper, right? And so the thought was, as Ali was saying, like we were venting this sort of feelings, these raw emotions that we were getting during COVID, produced this thought of, God, I know what they see, and what they see was on this phone that they had, right? And they just saw this viral George Floyd incident. We know what they're seeing. We know they're seeing rappers. We know they're seeing entertainers. We know they're seeing athletes. We know they're seeing George Floyd. What we know they don't see is Black historical figures that have done wonderful things in the past that could help shape their future. And so we started thinking about like hidden figures, right? Why did it take so long for us to realize how important these women were, not only to our country, but to this program of NASA? Like, why did it take so long, and why were they hidden? And then the thought was, there are Black men with great stories that are also hidden, right? And so the thought was that if we tell these boys about their past, it would help shape their future. And that's what they're lacking right now. They're lacking that inspiration. They're lacking that sort of connection to their past, so they can dream about being someone or being better than someone, right? And so that's what we wanted today. We wanted to basically change their narrative of what was happening in society, where young Black men are treated as threats, right? And basically give them hope and inspiration through this book.
Let's talk about mental health a little bit, because you touched on it, Ali. Your son seeing your face. George, I'm sure it was the same. I have a 9-year-old daughter, but she could see some of the frustration. Taking care of your own mental health. We didn't talk about this, but this is the conversation I think we're at. How do y'all do that? Specifically during that time, what things did y'all do to make sure that you were okay?
That's a great question. I think, at that moment, there was an intention to connect more than with family, right? Because what was happening at that point, though, is that all of a sudden we are in a pandemic, and now everybody is forced to be home. Because prior to that, we're all on this hamster wheel. Everybody, you wake up this particular hour, you're out the door. Before you know it, your kids are already gone. They're gone to school. So the family's already separated. And before you even know it, they're already graduating and they're off to school, right? They're off to college or something. So you're not even getting enough time with your own family, because everybody's out trying to do something just to make sure that the lights are on, there's gas in the car, and there's food on the table, all right? And so this was that moment to where everything slowed down. And so once we started to experience this, which was a very visceral pain, it was that moment to connect back to what's the most important. And sometimes I think we forget that, because for us, the one thing at this time that really gave us a sense of that truth in our existence, because again, feeling suffocated, our air, especially for me, was my family. So what I ended up doing was learning how to be more present by even just being present in the house. So it's not just because I'm sitting at home means that I'm here, but am I actually actively engaging with my family, with my son, with my daughter, with my wife? Because sometimes they would say, because I travel a lot, I have a nonprofit and I do work in my home country in Sierra Leone. So I'm back and forth. So a lot of times when I come home, I'm like, yeah, daddy's right here, but not knowing that daddy's really not here. Sometimes my brain's way back in Sierra Leone and they're trying to say something. I'm like, yeah, I missed that. And to me, I'm thinking, yeah, whatever, we'll just catch it up on the next one, But I learned after, in that particular moment, that daddy, you got a lot more work to do. So this was that thing for the mental health, to where it was the only thing that saved me, that really made me again feel whole, was just reconnecting back to why I think I'm here on earth, again, was to be a father and a husband, and to see that every day and actually participate in it, all of a sudden started to calm me down. and make me feel like, all right, you're getting back to your purpose, you know? So it was something, again, to where with some of these things you learn too, that even with children, that sometimes you think you want to shelter them, that you want to keep things away from them. But this got to teach me that, and my dad tried to teach me this as I was growing up, to just be honest. Sometimes you think that maybe that's too much for them to understand. No, it's not, you know, especially nowadays, because what children are actually witnessing and seeing, a lot of times you don't even know what it is. I mean, they've got access to everything, right? So if you're not having a conversation with your child, best believe somebody else is. So we were no longer like hiding things off. So it was like, yeah, hey, no, look, yeah, those police officers, they killed that man. What did they do? They knelt on him, you know? And we had to go through that. And I got to see my daughter, especially, just her face just wash over with fear, right? This was at a time, too, again, when the man whose name should not be mentioned, who had become president, when she was a child, you know, this was about, how many years ago was that? When he got elected, she got on a bus, and a white child on the bus told her, oh, yeah, Trump's going to kill you. And this is real, you know? So these are all these things, again, that we were like dealing with, you know, as parents. So when these things started happening, it was like, are we really shielding our children from stuff if we're not really able to tell them the reality of what's out there and what's happening? And so it was, again, that chance to reconnect and, again, hone that in. And so to find your own mental space and all of that, the truth is, if you really just connect back with what's the most important, you know, it's the only way to center yourself, to be honest. The only way.
For me, it was discussion, right? I mean, that's really what it was. You had all this pent up frustration, and I was kind of stuck in the middle of it. I'm a prosecutor in the middle of a situation where, right, I am an arm of the justice system that deals with this sort of thing. So I'm in the car, you know, with my daughter, and, you know, I hate police. And I was like, I work with police. Like, I work with troopers, I work with city police, county police, you know, and so having these conversations. And so luckily I was able to have these conversations with her. So what is it that you don't like about police? You know, well, you know, what they did to George Floyd. And I was like, well, that's in Minnesota. We live in Asheville. Like, so you're stereotyping the same individuals that are up there down here. That's the same issue that we're having in this country, right? And so it was a lot of back and forth in our sort of trips when we did have school, and I was taking her. But it was the thought of having these sort of thoughtful discussions. So she went away from I hate police to I hate the system, and I was like, okay. Now let's start talking. Like, what do you hate about the system, right? And so we got to dive in a little bit more as to some of the reasoning behind the frustration, right? And that's built up, especially during COVID, right? It was building up, and if you don't release it, right, that's when it becomes an issue mentally. So I was able to use that time to be able to discuss truthfully with my family as to what was going on, and that allowed me to have some sort of sanity, especially during this time where I am in the court system, dealing with police, seeing it and having sort of protest in my own hometown, and feeling like I am on the other side, right?
It's an interesting discussion about value and worth, because when we're in those spaces mentally, we can discover, let me change that, rediscover our value and worth. And for children who are having these discussions, are blessed to be able to do so, they can also discover their value and worth. And it reminded me, this is a great book that I like, Black Mental Health Matters, by a gentleman named Aaron Snyder, licensed marriage and family therapist. And this is something that he says: if a child is continuously told that they are ugly or stupid with little or no feedback suggesting otherwise, that child will likely believe the negative feedback, which will eventually mold him into a person of low self-esteem. So without those discussions that you're talking about, how do we help the children understand their value and worth and have high self-esteem? He says a lot of other things that we won't get into, but I think it's interesting. So my question for the two of you, to piggyback off this sort of mental health segment here, is when did you realize your value and worth? And did it ebb and flow? How did the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill play into that? Was it different, George, on the soccer field versus off the soccer field? Talk about that for a little bit.
I think I'm still trying to find my value and worth. I mean, I think in life, you always want to strive to figure out what it is that you can still produce to still provide the people around you. And so for me, it was weird because, growing up, again, there's a struggle within the African American community, right? If you're trying to get ahead, you're trying to get smart, why are you talking like that, right? Why are you talking smart? Why are you reading? Why is your pants sagging? And so you had to fight within your own community to even get ahead and to prove that you're better, right, than what people were trying to see you as, right? And so my value, my worth as I was growing up was an athlete. Luckily, Carolina put me in my place, right? And I say that and because
Preach, brother, preach.
I say that because I went there as a student athlete. There was no student in me at that time. It was straight athlete. Luckily, as I look at it now, right, is after 2 years, I was falling behind in my academics, that I was removed from the soccer team. The most difficult phone call to this day was calling my mom, right? And I can just see myself shaking, be like, oh my God, I've got to call her. What's going to happen? But, again, talking with her about it. What are you going to do, George? You going to come home? Nope. For sure no. I mean, it's not happening. But what it allowed me to do is refocus, right? So for the next 2 years, I became a student. So for the first 2 years, I was on academic probation. The last semester of college, I was on the dean's list, right? And so I was trying to find my value, my worth. At first, it was an athlete, and then it was a student. And then at that point, I was like, I need to do more. And so felt like I wanted to go back home to be back in my roots, give something back. I tried to go back to Asheville, get a job in my field, communications, media, and film production. I thought I could get a job. Coming back from Carolina, no. So I started teaching, realized, unfortunately, that I was like, I'm not going to be able to raise a family as a teacher. So I was like, what do I need to do? And so I felt like I needed to go to either law school, grad school. I needed to do something else. So I decided to go to law school because I knew I needed to know my rights. I knew that if any point I wanted to start my own business, it would be like that. No one in my family was a lawyer. So I wanted to be able to provide worth for not only myself, but my family, right? And so my worth is continuing to grow, right? As I tell them, when I go back into Asheville, when people speak of me, they're like, oh, that's a soccer player and the attorney and the author, right? And you just keep adding value and worth. And so that, to me, is a continual process for not only myself, but to be able to teach the kids about the book as well.
Ali, this is interesting. You growing up in West Africa, so you see, and you already alluded to it, successful Black people. Mm-hmm. So there's not like there's this misnomer that all we are athletes and entertainers, right? Mm-hmm. How was it for you finding your work? The power of you is what you write in the book. How was that for you, like differently than maybe George's experience?
Well, first of all, I'd never made a dean's list. I think George took some easy classes he didn't tell me about, and he got on that. But mine, again, it did have to do with home. But I think in me finding or feeling that value for the first time, I believe it comes from like an external validation. Okay, it's like something has to happen, which, I mean, strangely, that maybe somebody else's perception of it or somebody else invalidating something that you're doing, all of a sudden then you get to internalize it and you feel like, oh, all right, I do have value. Because a lot of times, you believe that. But then there comes that moment, though, to where either there's something in the brain or something that, maybe like some doubt. But you need something to happen externally for you to then at least be able to see it. At least that's what happened for me. So this was here at Chapel Hill, my senior year. Last semester, I actually was fortunate enough to get into the very first master class here taught by David Sontag. And this was at a time where I did my very first writing. I did a screenplay, and I wrote on the Civil War back home. I called it Boy Soldiers. And so all of a sudden, and David Sontag at the time had just come here for the first time, and he was starting this master class and only accepted 10 students. And so I was the one student who got in, who had in a lot of people's minds, and the other 9 students had no business being in there, because I did not take that course. I was not in any screenwriting courses. I was not in any TV production stuff. They were kind of like, man, we all roll together. Where did this guy come from? And so I remember getting in there and sitting down and submitting pages to him, right? And then when we would go through readings, he would lull himself to sleep, because it was just long. I mean, these were the first time, trying to write screenplays for the first time. But every time my story came up, he was wide awake, and he was focused, and he was paying attention. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, got something here. So then I started feeling like, man, I guess I can write, And he was like, yeah, hey, I'll be honest with you. I think you need to pursue this. Introduced me to Jean-Pierre Bicolo, who was here at the time too, and said, you should go out and try to make this into a movie. So all of a sudden I started feeling like, oh, all right. So maybe, I'm going to graduate. I'm going to get a degree. I'm going to go make some movies. Well, then, yeah, you get out to LA, and that humbled you. I was like, okay, that's not happening. But, I'm not going to give it up. Made a short film. George and I did. We produced something that turned out pretty good. But the next stage came as an adult when I started my current job, which is establishing this not-for-profit that does, it has 2 flagships. This is back in Sierra Leone. We run a sort of a micro-enterprise division back home where we provide financial literacy, but we give grants, and we also give, starting to figure out how to give low-interest loans to petty traders, particularly women. All right. And the idea is to try to help them to get out of poverty and to hopefully take away from the microfinance division, which for us really basically just steals money from them. The second flagship is, and we also make them save. So we're the very first organizational program that mandatory got people, particularly women, to save money. And you have to think about this. The reason why this is so important is back home, if you're barely making $1 a day in profit, what are you going to put to the side? So nobody was going to buy that idea. But once folks started to do that, and we have them in a special way where they're doing that in groups, their money started to multiply. So they started to see there's something to this. And now they bought into it. And for the first time, we've opened up the most accounts in the district that we're in than anybody at a bank. Okay, so we were so excited. Then we took on another project, and this was to develop a children's community for orphans, modeled after Shanti Bhavan, and we are, this was out in India. And so we are hoping to raise about 50 young girls and maybe even some boys, but try to give them a leg up through education, right? And it was, I think in this moment, in recognizing that I was still being a creative, because here I was going back home, and all of a sudden it was as if I was completing a cycle. I got to leave. I got to get out. I got to come and get the education. I got to come and get the benefits. And now I was taking something back. But what I was learning back there was I was still being blessed through their lives and their stories and their existence. And I was like, maybe I'm getting a lot more from them than I'm giving. But you start to get a sense of value, though, through that whole sort of circle of it, So for me, there's a lot more that I think, as George says, as you keep growing, there's more that comes with it.
That's my line, Ali.
Sorry. I have a chance to take some of that. My bad. But bottom line is, it was in those moments that I started to really feel like, yeah, all right, there is some value to this, and at least somewhat your own self-worth as to what you do does matter,
What's interesting is listening to both of them talk. What they're saying about their lives is represented in the book. Once you read the book, you those points of departure that I mentioned, they're all here. Ali's favorite couple pages in the book are these right here. I know that because he told some children that this morning. With joy and love, this is written for you. Believe in yourself and all you can do. everything Ali just said is right here on this page. So that concept of like value and worth, it does, there, it ebbs and flows, but it changes also. And I think that that's interesting. Representation is an interesting thing too. There's inventors in the book. There's athletes. There's politicians. There are African scholars in the book. I think about W.E.B. Du Bois's American Negro exhibition at the Paris Exposition 1900. I think about the Ebony pictorial series. This is from 1971. It's got some rust on it. I think about these things that maybe we had growing up in the 80s and 90s, which are different from the book that y'all have done and others like it. Talk about the forms, and we'll start with you, George, of representation that y'all were thinking about. Because when you mentioned, well, what happened to wanting to be a scholar, a doctor, lawyer, well, they're in all these other, from that generation, but it seems like we don't have as much access to those. So talk about representation in terms of what you wanted to do with the book.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird because when I grew up with Ebony and Jet magazines. Right. And so I would see that. And that's why I always ask my mom, like, what happened? Like, there was a breakdown where all of a sudden education was what everyone strived to. And then now everyone's throwing it away. Like, where is the disconnect? Right. And so I was always brought up Charles Drew, who kind of invented sort of blood plasma and all that kind of stuff. And so representation, I used to see always in those magazines. And she just had a stack of them. And so it's weird because when you think about representation, you know, the kids see it and they see it all day in entertainment, and whether that be on whatever field or in some sort of music video, all day, every day, right? That representation is there and it's almost oversaturated where you don't even see it anywhere else, right? And so my thought is that, God, we were talking about before, we were like, it used to be in movies where you just see them and they are either the drug dealers, they are criminal defendants, right? They're the bad guys, whatever it may be. So what we wanted to do was give the kids some sort of representation of a full array of individuals that have done great things, right? So that they could be anything, as we had talked about before, they put their mind to. And so it was weird. As we were coming up with this book, we fell into the same trap the kids do. We were like, oh, we kept including ballers and entertainers, right? Because on replay, this is what you're getting from the video feeds and from television. Is just, you just get to see Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, like, and you just music and all this. And so you fail to realize, again, these other individuals. So luckily our agent snapped us out of it. And they're like, wait a minute. He was like, this is what we're trying to change. This is, again, what we see, that we know they're seeing, but what they don't see, right, is people in the book. People that have, like, the courage of William Goines, the first Black Navy SEAL, Emory Malik, the first African-American with a U.S. pilot license. We have the Canadian, Elijah McCoy, right, who we put in the book because Ken Daley is Canadian. So we decided to start putting in there. And then, of course, it was weird because initially it was all African-American people. And then Ali stepped up.
Yo, man. Now, I'm not going to be able to go home because they're like, you wrote a book and you didn't even put an African, not even a Sierra Leonean. So we're like, okay, remember now, Black history literally is world history. All right. So it was more like, okay, so then let's at least then talk about, or at least put or highlight the motherland. So that's why Chinua Achebe came in. But part of this with the representation, what was very important, especially for this generation, was to make sure we could put children into the shoes of these people. So as you can notice, the very first person we put in there was Colin Kaepernick. It was to represent something that we would say it would be a lot easier for them to connect to, because once you can connect to that person, then you can start to see the importance in the others. So put in Barack Obama. We definitely know every Black history we talk about Martin Luther King, because we do this test from every time we go out into book talks. Like if we were to just do a silent thing, everybody raise a hand and say, for Black History Month, name 3 people. Guaranteed out of those 3, all of us would name at least 2, you know, because it's always on the same repeat. So the thought too was, for the representation, try to at least show that there's so much more to Black excellence. Let's expand the lexicon, right? Let's at least start to get into this canon of what Black people have achieved and show a lot more by being very simple, but also just showing these very like, I would say not familiar names, and then maybe hopefully they can become household names. It's like Arthur Mitchell. We've had so much fun with that one, especially for black boys to be able to say, hey, do you know that boys can also do ballet? Oh man, we had a tough one today at one school. We were like, these dudes were not trying to get down with that, And we were like, yep, but we're definitely going to talk about it and show you that. And so it's so much fun to see that you can start pulling back some of these layers and sometimes some of these preconceived notions that they already have by using a picture book, by representing stuff like that into something this way. And so now the job is in your hands, you guys as educators who are gatekeepers, to really just go through and just hit it home,
One of the interesting things about Colin Kaepernick, the dancer, is we can trace back 100 or so years to Africans or black people doing these things, being an athlete and protesting, right? So we don't have to just say it's Colin Kaepernick. No. What happened in 1968? Them brothers is on the podium, right? So now we can really have a full discussion about it, right? Yeah. Alvin Ailey. So we want to talk about black dance. We can talk about Alvin Ailey. Robert Farris Thompson's book, African Art in Motion, gets into some of this. And today, tell them about the steppers. Shout out to the steppers at Club Boulevard Elementary that were teaching y'all some stepping, because as I'm watching that, I'm thinking, this is African. This is black. And I mean, I don't even know if y'all are Greek, but when you are in a fraternity, I mean, that's part of it, right?
Yeah, we weren't allowed to get into the Greek back then. Let's move on, Mike.
Okay, we'll move on. Hey, let me look into the camera for this one. They didn't want me either, okay? But briefly, and then we'll move on. Talk about what that was like for y'all. We were on a tight deadline. Shout out to Miss Calhoun over at Carrington, because we were on a tight deadline, and we had to text her to say, hey, we're going to be a little behind, because George was like, they got to teach us some moves.
Yes. So it all stemmed from Arthur Mitchell, right? And so we bring the kids up, and of course, we want them to show us their ballet moves. And they did. And some boys, we wanted to pick boys, we wanted to pick girls, right? And they got up and showed us their ballet moves and kind of posed like Arthur Mitchell. And then, unbeknownst to us, they went ahead and said, hey, we can step as well.
Yeah, this was all on their own.
Yes.
They volunteered this, And for kids to come up and do something in front of others, that was a big moment, It was really cool.
It was. You could see the pride in it. Everyone was attentive. It was like a pin drop. There was no one was talking. Everyone was watching them. And the way the clap sounds, everything, it was very in sync, very ordered, very prideful. It was one of those moments where everyone who was involved was paying attention to those boys, right? And it gave them the strength and courage to be able to feel like they're being looked at, right? And having value and having worth.
That doesn't happen if y'all aren't there discussing this book, showing them, getting back to feelings, vulnerability though. Right, George does this thing. I'm not going to ask him to do it right now.
Oh, Michael, please do.
But they ask him. When they're talking about ballet. George obviously purposely does a dance that is not ballet, and it gets the kids excited. And why don't you do that dance, George? That
yes, Michael.
It's for the Zoom audience too. Why don't you do that?
Do the gritty, man. Do ballet, George. Okay. Do ballet. Let's see some ballet.
Mike, you did say you weren't going to put me on a spot, but
brother, get up and do ballet, man. Let us see this. Because in talking about vulnerability, this is how we, in truth, we get the children to sort of feel that and then make the attempt, right? All right, so we have this riff that we do. We talk about Arthur Mitchell, and then we go through this and we say, oh, look at this pose that he's doing. And then George will say, Ali, go ahead.
So we start off with, show me the style of your favorite dance. Just like Arthur Mitchell, look at my stance. And then we ask them, so what kind of dance is this? And they say ballet, and I say, all right, Ali, I got ballet for you, Ali. Is this ballet? Is this ballet?
It's on camera. It's live.
that ballet, and I'm like, Ali, okay. All right, and then we have them come up, right, because it kind of breaks down those barriers, and they're getting involved. And then I'm like, what about this, Ali?
Is this ballet?
No, that's floss, right? And so that's part of the routine of trying to get them engaged, right, and allow them to feel confident in themselves, right? Sometimes that means I have to make a fool of myself.
Gotta be vulnerable.
Yes.
Gotta be vulnerable.
Yeah, but it's a wonderful opportunity for them to come share the spotlight with us.
You do a masterful job, man.
Thank you.
Your gritty is top notch.
Thank you.
Please post that on social media.
So one of the most beautiful things about that and watching the kids react to not only him doing a dance that is not ballet, but doing a dance that they know that they can do better, and they want to come up and show him. It's a different type of representation. And as I was watching that today, I was thinking about Dr. Joy DeGruy's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, because she discusses the media images that we get, and that's what we think, right? That is not what this is. That is not what's in this book. Listen to Dr. DeGruy quickly. The media images of African Americans are seared into the mental frying pan of its citizenry, swallowed whole, and eventually go unconsciously down the social gut of America. Here's the key part, and what is ingested is rarely the truth. But this is the truth. The joy, I got some emails and texts from some of my daughter's teachers, and the joy that they all got from y'all being there, but specifically some of that stuff, I thought was amazing. One of the questions, and then we'll move on quickly as we get ready to wrap up, from teachers that was submitted earlier is, how in the world did you narrow down the list? I mean, because there's literally hundreds of thousands or more. So how did y'all do that?
Well, we knew we wanted to start with Colin because of the sacrifice that he did, and we knew that a lot of the kids wanted to be ballers and rappers. I'm like, well, here's a baller who gave up everything, right? And so that's what we wanted to gravitate. It's not about the money; it's about standing up for what you believe in. So we knew we were going to start there, and then immediately we went from there actually to Tommy Smith, right? And then we kept going, but the problem was he's an athlete, right? And you get athletes. And so we're trying to figure out who it was. Again, I was trying to think, Elijah McCoy came late in the game. Again, once they figured out who our illustrator was, Ken Daley, we were like, let's see if we can find, I think our agent was like,
Think about a Canadian.
yes, see if there's anyone. And so obviously we have Chinua Achebe that Ali spoke up brilliantly about. Barack, we knew was going to be in there just because Barack is Barack. We knew he's going to end the book as well.
You got to coin that one. Barack is Barack. That's good.
The others, it kind of felt with the flow of the book, right? I mean, it's a rhyming book, so it had to kind of also meet. The name couldn't be too long. It couldn't be too short. So we had to figure out who it was that we felt that would still provide a purpose and a feeling.
In 40 pages.
Yes.
Because that's, again, first-time authors, we get to learn that. You only got 40, I'm putting up 4. You only got 40 pages for you to convey this in. So we had to then, again, decide how many people can you pick. Because at some point, this actually has to translate then from just the rhyming scheme with their names into that path of a story that comes towards the end of the book. So at the end, I think, what do we end up with, 9?
Yeah.
So, I mean, but there's, you don't miss, because the truth is, it's like hitting fish in a barrel. There's just too many names in this thing. So it's just basically just going through and trying to pick and to figure out, like, okay, like, well, how can you make this work into a rhyme scheme once we've at least got these different categories of individuals that we wanted to use. So, I mean, it was tough because, like, for me, I was named after Muhammad Ali, so I always felt my first picture book, Muhammad Ali was going to be in it.
It rhymes.
And I had a good one too. That float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. That sure hell rhymes with C. I was like, man, we got something right here. No, that was another athlete. I was like, oh man. So, so there are a few in there. What about you? Did you have anybody in particular that you left out?
John Lewis, Langston Hughes. I mean, the list can go on. Langston Hughes. I mean, Alvin Haley had talked about, Thurgood Marshall. I mean, the list, and that's kind of the whole thought of it. We also wanted to include some people that they knew, right? Because if you give them confidence, oh, I know Martin Luther King, right? You don't want to give them all new people, right? You got to give them a little bit of what they already know so they can feel confident in themselves and see themselves already answering in the book, right, of who these individuals are. So we kind of just categorized it. And we're like, all right, we got an athlete, right? Now let's look for an activist. What about this? Do we have an inventor? Do we have someone who served in the armed forces? And so we broke kind of that out and then just tried to figure out who we had and what story we could tell based upon those categories.
Yeah, I left out Stephen Bantu Biko, man. That was someone, because again, that's my middle name. So that was another one. And that one actually stung.
Ali
I was like,
was quite hurt about that.
I was definitely hurt about that one. But hey, we definitely got some more to do. So we'll keep going.
This idea of understanding history is important, and in the beginning of the book, you write this: strength of people throughout history who paved the way. So you want the youth to understand who came before. It reminded me of Randall Robinson's book, The Debt, when he says that when we don't know our history, we specifically are like history's amnesiacs, and the cost of this obstructed view of ourselves is harmful because we don't know, somebody else is telling us. He says it's incalculable, which I think is interesting. How do y'all individually, and let's do this one quickly, at home with your sons, talk about this
history so that they don't have an obstructed view, and how did that affect how you approach the book? It turns into a direct conversation. I'll keep mine really brief. It was, but I got the opportunity for me too. Again, being from West Africa, I actually took my children home. So one of the ways where I sort of feel something I get a little bit more of the leg up on George is coming from the motherland and being born there. There's a more direct connection to my origin, right? So I get to take my children back home to where I say it all started. And so for me, there's very little noise back there for them, and I can actually get to them, show them, where they come from. And actually, we'll go to our own museums and we'll show them things and say, here, these are people you will never hear about. All right. So before you're even worried about the history you're going to learn back in school, let me share with you this. And then also too, our culture is very traditional with storytelling. So part of that too, in telling our history, is to go through stories. And so with that, it becomes a fun and exciting thing, around the fire pit, sitting there and telling stories of like, whether it's fantasy or not, but then you interweave some history into it. So for them, they get a very first-hand account of what I would say would be their history. And I think, to me, again, with children, the best way to always approach it is with the truth and be honest and direct, and don't sugarcoat it, Just give it to them real.
George, one of the questions from teachers also was with the sort of pushing aside of Black history. We don't have to go into details. Everybody knows what we're talking about. Like, how did that affect your approach to the book?
Well, for us, it's weird because we had this idea of this would be a great book. We didn't even think about just for Black history. And so our thought was, we spent all this time in this country trying to desegregate and but yet our history is still segregated. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like, what?
Say that again, George.
Right?
Say that again for the people in the
history,
back.
right?
History, yeah.
Yes, is meant, right? And we fought for desegregation, but yet the history that we teach is still segregated. Right. And so the thought about trying to make sure that we expand, again, that history is the history of this country, not just the history of a specific race, is something that I felt is getting looked over. Right. And it's getting pushed aside. And clearly right now, especially right now with CRT and banning and all this kind of stuff that's happening right now, like there is a purpose behind people trying to erase whatever history that is already in play. And it's weird because it's kind of unique on my end, because in court, I always have two different sides. There's always two different sides. But in teaching history, we've only been given one side every single time. And it always makes me wonder, why is one side getting pushed to the side that we don't even have? And I'm not talking about replacing a narrative. I'm talking about adding a narrative, right? Adding more narrative so that we can get a full understanding of the picture of the history that allowed us to be here.
Can we clap for that one? So, last thing before we do Q&A, whenever, if you ever do an event with Christy Norris, when she claps high, that means you need to rap. So, one of the last questions we got, you all got at Carrington Middle School today. So shout out to the folks at Carrington. This student asked y'all, what are you most proud of from doing the book? And you both kind of had a moment of like, wait a minute, like hadn't even thought about that, right? And I love the way the young man asked the question, because he was asking from a standpoint of, do you realize what you're contributing? And so if y'all could take a brief moment, each of you, and answer that question for this audience.
What I'm most proud of the book is that it will outlive me. Like, it'll outlive me. So it'll be on a shelf. And as I was telling Ali, there's you never know when you'll inspire someone, or whenever that inspiration will be felt, or when that moment will happen. But to know that something is there that could give someone hope and inspiration when I'm not there makes me feel proud, makes me feel valued, it makes me feel that I've left something on, not only for my kids, but for society as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll piggyback off that. The truth is that being able to create something like this, and honestly, and see a young black boy hug this thing, all right, and like, this is mine, and you're like, we wrote this. These are words and stuff that are going to inspire you, or they actually you feel connected to it. There is no greater feeling, especially as an author, but also as a father, just even as a person, to feel that something that you had internalized and thought of and said, yes, I think this is of value, this can do something. Then you put it out there, but then you actually get to see that targeted audience react with it. Oh man. And so for us, just being in these spaces and meeting these children, it really does inspire us to hopefully want to do more. But it is very, very proud thing for us to say, hey, we've created this, and it's been birthed and it's in the world. And like you said, it definitely will get to outlast us. We're very thankful for that.
Let's clap for that one too. So, room full of a lot of educators. Educators like their students to ask questions. So, educators, please ask the authors some questions. I have no problem picking on somebody too, just like you probably say to your students. So I will point to somebody. Yes, sir.
Allow me to make a comment. And it begins with I wish. I'm older than most people in this room. I've always had a love and a fascination for books. I remember as a young kid, children's books for black people, black boys in particular. I recall reading this book called Little Black Sambo. And there was something very off about that to me, even as a young kid. And so what you have contributed here, I don't know.
You gonna make us cry.
Well, and to comment on that, I didn't like to read. I didn't. I just wanted to do everything but reading. Luckily, my mom took the initiative. She knew I was lacking in reading and knew I needed a reading clinic, right? And so you ain't going to practice, you go into the reading clinic, right? Now I read all the time. I read statutes, I read cases. I read all day, every day now. Title I helped me love reading, right? But understanding what that does and give confidence was why we did a picture book, right? For me, I like rhythm. I like Shel Silverstein. I like poem. I like to be able to find that rhythm, because then I can get in a flow and I can feel confident. And the thought of this book and why it would be a picture book as opposed to kind of getting in the realm with Jason Reynolds and all that kind of stuff was that if kids don't learn how to read by third grade, they're gonna be struggling, right? They're not going to participate. They're going to act out. There's going to be frustration. They're going to be left behind. They're not going to do well in society. You've got to give them confidence. And you get that through a picture book. You're able to gain that rhythm, that confidence. And at that point, if they gain confidence in reading, they'll read again. And they keep reading and they keep reading. And so when they're in class and they're talking about who wants to read this excerpt, right? And that's what I want to see more, right?
Thank you for sharing that.
We got one in the back first. Yeah.
Okay, well, you got the ball rolling here. What's next?
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah.
So our household is run by our daughters.
Yes.
So you can only imagine that the Black Girl book is next. So thankfully that was accepted, and shout out to Source Books for that, and we were so excited. So that comes out in January of 2024. Yes.
So my daughter got to meet them today at one of the schools, and one of the things she whispered to me was, "So, I mean, Dad, like, you got to talk to them. They said they were going to do one for girls, but like, how do I get involved?" And I was like, I don't know. We got to figure that out. I love the entrepreneur in her though, right? Like, you know, I'm trying to help too. We one of the questions from the Zoom. What are some suggestions for teachers on how to give students opportunities to dream and be creative thinkers, especially for those who need to see, as you were talking about, George, to believe?
That's a good one.
I think writing is always the key to being able to allow you to be able to think in a creative way. I think journaling is extremely important. I think this book just kind of opens the door, right? So we've got Colin Kaepernick. Now let's think about who else can we put in this book, right? Who else is an athlete? We've got Martin Luther King, right? He takes up this sort of category. Who else can we put in here? I mean, there could be a whole volume 2 that the students can think of on their own based upon the types of categories in this book. Let's challenge ourselves, right, as to who we can put in there, why we want to put them in there. And so my thought is just write, right? Because writing is a way of expression that I believe could help communicate, because not everyone feels comfortable communicating orally in that sort of sense, and they can write all day, right? And there's nothing more than I love to going into elementary schools and trying to decipher the reading. And I mean, they go paragraphs on, and the phonics behind, I just love it. It just brings internally, just makes me shine inside, right? They have that nature. It's innate in them to just write, continue with that, and that'll allow them to be creative thinkers.
What's interesting about that, I'm thinking about Daniel Black's book, The Coming. Has anybody read that book? If you have not, you have to read it, because he talks about why he writes and how important it is. And he's got a new book that's actually called Black on Black, Daniel Black, Black on Black, and he has a chapter, Why I Write. And it's because of that very reason that you just said. And I think it's interesting, how do we encourage children? There's lots of creative ways to express themselves. One of the things that happened today, I might ask y'all to do this, I don't know. At the end, you say this chant. I know I can be what I want to be. And they do this, and all the kids, and they're really excited. And at the middle school today, one of the young kings said, "Oh, that's Nas," right? Now you just said it. Well, if we use somebody that they know, there's an entry point, right? Yes. They hadn't said anything about hip hop the whole time, but they did that chant, and that young man knew, oh, that's Nas. Talk about that moment, Ali, because you were on that side, and you were like, oh, you kind of wanted to take
right.
that.
It was like, oh, we finally got an in, because the whole time, I mean, these brothers, they were kind of like, no, we're not really trying to participate in this. So the queens, the young queens, they were answering questions, they were participating. But the brothers were too cool for school at that moment. But I think once that happened, we recognized, though, then in that setting, and you guys know this, there has to be something that you are able to relate to, that they can relate to as well, right? There's got to be that connection. And the moment that happened, then something broke down. Because even when we did the chant, they weren't really participating like that. They were kind of like, yeah, but then they started saying a little bit. It was at the end, he's like, yeah, that's Nas. And I said, exactly. And the moment I did that, he was like, yeah. I was like, so you see that, that he's a rapper. Now you didn't want to do his chant. All of a sudden he kind of felt like, oh yeah, that's right. Maybe in the way you're saying it is a little different, but okay. So if he's a rapper and he did that, then it's got to be cool. I'm like, so we're pretty cool, bro. You know, you could at least done that. You know,
But
so,
rappers are also what, Ali?
they're also authors. They're storytellers. You know, and so again, it's trying to find that in, but it's always in a way to where even for us, because we come in and we do a presentation, there was less chance for us to learn who they were and to listen. But I think those of you who are already in the classrooms, it's like you already innate to that. Like once you know, then you kind of can feel like where you can pinch and turn to at least get them to pay attention, or maybe be able to then provide them something they'll take, because you're going to serve it in a way that, yeah, this is something you like, so let me give it to you with this, and you'll accept it. But that was that moment, because man, they were a hard crowd for a minute. And I was like, man, I don't even know if we're breaking through. I'm sure maybe later on we will, but at that moment it was like, oh, you know. So that was special.
One of the things you were talking earlier about talking with your mom, you were like asking her like, well, what happened? Like, Christy hates when I go on these tangents, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Leslie Fenwick, Howard University, a book was published called Jim Crow's Pink Slip. So with Brown versus Board, as y'all know, roughly 100,000 educators, black educators lost their jobs. So that's kind of part of what happened. The other thing is that familiarity, right, that you had with this young king in that chant, right? So that's lost. So there's a question submitted earlier about how can white teachers, white educators essentially connect? Well, we got to know the cultures. We got to know each other.
Yes.
One of the great things about both of these gentlemen is they know how to connect. They have to in their professions, but it's just a practice. It's a lived thing, and I wanted to just sort of offer that affirmation to you in that point. Let's take two more in the room before we wrap, and you had your hand, and then we'll go over there. Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about history pre-college. Oh, sorry. Pre-college. What would you want to have your teachers teach you, both for yourselves, but for your classmates as well, to learn alongside you?
So let's repeat it for the Zoom audience. If you could go back, what would you want people to teach you about
History, true things that you don't, that you've learned since, that you wish had been centered, whether it's a topic, a person, something that you would have liked to have studied in high school?
See how I looked that off? Because I'm like, I have no idea. That's a great question. That's a great question.
For me, it's connecting why I'm learning, right? I mean, and I say it now because I am extremely embarrassed that I don't know Spanish. My name is Jorge, right? Everyone assumes based on but I took it in high school. I took it in college, but I was taking it for the test, right? I didn't really have someone tell me, like, I mean, there's a connection as to why y'all are teaching it to the students. I think it gets missed sometimes because everyone wants to test and everyone's trying to make sure that the scores are great. The purpose behind learning, I think, is what is most important than learning and continuing to learn, is why are we learning these types of things, is what I would probably take away from. And another thing would probably just be, I really didn't get into African-American history until Carolina. I just didn't. It was one of those things, again, you only got it in February, and they only gave you the same Frederick Douglass, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King. Like, they gave the same ones, and I didn't ever venture out, right? And I think by venturing out, it allows them, especially young black boys, to be able to see other things and inspire them to perhaps think beyond what they normally see as success. And I wish that I would have had that ability to be able to dig in and to see and have this wealth of knowledge of African-American history and what that meant for me growing up.
Beautiful. I really don't have anything. I'll be honest. I think for me, even in growing up, I was more of a visual learner. And so I found a lot of my own education came through me mostly like watching films and just being in my own imagination. So when I went to class, when I sat there, I was there, but I don't know if I was really fully present. I mean, when I got to college, I'm here at Chapel Hill, and I'll be honest, I skipped a lot of class because it was
He still
I-
wasn't there, right? He just, I mean,
it just wasn't as engaging. I think for me though, it's the moments I can remember again comes back to the likes of you. There had to be a particular teacher. So there are certain classes I would go to only because I loved the way the teacher taught. And so that way I was able to at least understand the information, but want to be there to get it, you know. But after that, it was like, I don't really, there's nothing else I'm going to go learn, because then if I go and learn this, I'm not going to remember it. And then what am I going to do with it? So I was that kind of a person. But then once I got out into the real world, I just know that every day in the real world, I'm learning something anyway. And I've really enjoyed the real world school a lot more because I'm a lot more hands-on, you know. I think for me, the sitting in the one place became hard. So I would never be able to feel like, hey, you can add anything to that. It was more like, please, when is this done? You know, because I want to go to Mrs. Robinson's class because she was cool. But I don't like this one. Yeah. Mr. Todd, you're not, this is not happening. I'm just going to fall asleep in this one. So I think it was the educators, you know. When you got the right one, man, that was like straight, that was like a straight sugar rush.
All right, we'll do you, and then we'll take you, and then we'll wrap up.
To the book.
Ooh. The same way one of the kids were this morning, that boy looks like me. And ironically, Ken had no pictures of our boys. Our boys, the hair, I mean, it looked like both of our boys. And they were with us throughout this process. So as we're writing, it was a family affair. God, Ali's wife, kids, my wife, and our kids, like they were giving us ideas. They were looking at the whole process. And ultimately, in the end, the statement, "Dad, you did this for me," was something that will
Look
always.
at y'all gonna make us cry, man. That collective sigh, that touches the spirit. No, but yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry, that was beautiful.
I mean, that's kind of their initial. I mean, and just feeling the engravings. We were talking about once we got the book, right, and handed it to my son, and just him almost like Braille, just like going over it and feeling it, and it was like, the boy looks like me, Dad, and so that statement, I think, just resonates with me every time because we hear it in all these other schools as well. And so that's kind of the first statement that I got from him when he saw the cover.
And they're at that perfect age right now because I use this particularly with my son. He's very shy. Like even for me, it took me till age 30, 35 to be able to look people in the eye and have a conversation. And that's my boy. He's my mini-me. So I have a very personalized letter to him in that one to where I'm like, yeah, man, before you go out on certain things, you got to read this. And it has been a miracle to see it actually work, you know? So it's been that blessing. But yeah, when we got this and it came home and you unpackage this thing and you open it up, he got to do it. You know, my daughter was very pissed at me for that one. Sorry, Sienna. You know, I was like, but don't worry, yours comes. Is this his turn? But to see that life and excitement in his eyes when he did it just like that, it was like, yes, this looks like me because it was in full color and it was right there physically in your hands. Man, those are moments that, yeah, memories we will never forget. So big shout out to Source Books for fulfilling big dreams, you know, making magic happen.
So I just want to say I'm an educator. I teach at the university, UNC.
Yeah.
And you know, and I love what you all said about UNC. So
Go Heels. Go Heels.
but as you know, our university is under sustained attack for the idea of diversity being considered in any kind of admissions process or hiring process. We just argued a case at the Supreme Court. We're probably going to lose. You're a lawyer, you can appreciate this. What would you say to these leaders of our state who say diversity doesn't matter? Or why did diversity matter to you at UNC, and why should it matter to all of us in the state of North Carolina, in our state university system?
The world itself is a melting pot. You know what I mean? There is so much more that really unites us than divides us. And sometimes I think you get so enclosed and you end up in this bubble that you don't get to see it. So how are you going to ever appreciate it? The biggest blessing for me was being able to leave one part of the world to come to another. But just, you know, at that moment when you think the world is so big, you all of a sudden recognize it's like it's so small, you know? But the whole truth behind diversity is that we're all so connected that until we recognize, though, that in honest, I mean, I say this, I'm going to do the best way to say it. It's that we all share a common purpose on earth. Every single one of us, regardless of your skin color. And that's to be good to one another. And the only time you really see the world work in the right way is when we actually uphold those values, right? So there's so much you get to learn from somebody who is different than you know, as opposed to what you should fear from them. And the more you push that away, the more that you are actually losing out on. And I just think the more you accept it, the richer you do become. And it's not about money. I think the new currency in life is going to be about the people you know. Because at some point, especially out of my culture, money is of a value, yet it provides you certain means. But at the end of the day, if I go home to Sierra Leone and I'm dead broke, but I know somebody who's there who's also dead broke, they would provide me with somewhere to sleep, somewhere to stay, and whatever piece, even if it's a morsel of rice, they will split it in half so we can share it because we see each other as people, right? And I think we just need to connect right back to that. So it's a sad thing, though, that we are sort of pushing ourselves away or allowing others to do that. And I think that's why for us, for those of you as educators, it's maybe we didn't recognize that growing up and being in your spaces, but you have that opportunity and you've always had that. And that's what you do, is to let those young minds really understand and embrace that. Because thankfully right now it's good to see that the next generation is a lot more tolerant, you know, and they are really fighting for that change. And so as much as we can become cynical, there's a lot of hope that's still out there because of that. So, I mean, to those who are doing it, the truth is right now you just got to look at them and laugh and say, hey, keep trying, you know, because the way I see it, no matter how hard they fight it, it's not going to happen. It's just, it's a struggle and it sucks. But there are too many of us who I just say, and I was talking about that earlier, to where too many of us maybe don't vocalize it enough or speak out enough. And the voices that are the loudest makes it seem like they're the ones who are dominating. It's just, they're just louder and they're more committed. So we have to become more committed just like they are. And that's how we can change that.
Good job, Ali. Diversity recognizes the beauty in humanity. Without that, what are you truly learning, right? And then that's what this book is about. If we continue to learn the same individuals, right, then are we truly learning, right? If you're learning from the same type of curriculum, the same type of individuals, right? Traveling, seeing other people, that's how you learn, right? If you don't have that different culture, that different perspective, then you're only guided one way. Your only mind is on a narrow mind, and so you're not seeing clearly. And so diversity is extremely important in that it gives you the true education of what someone else feels like and understands and goes through. And through that, we learn how to be better humans.
I think it's a great segue and way to end. I want to offer a word about Richard Wright's book, Black Boy. There's no way we could have this conversation and not bring up Richard Wright. Came out in 1945, as you know, and it was on a banned list in the late 70s, too. This is so ironic. But this is what was written in the New York Times in 1945 about Richard Wright's autobiography, Black Boy. He learned to be servile and obsequious, to say sir to drunken and contemptible white men, to conceal his thoughts and emotions beneath a mask of humble good humor and deference, not to do so to forget the sir or the mister, or to aspire to a learned skill trade, to show resentment of sneers, condensation, and abuse was to invite trouble, and trouble could mean death. I want to say thank you to George and Ali and Ken for helping to reaffirm the humanity of Black boys, showing them they don't have to be servile, they don't have to be obsequious, they don't have to conceal their emotions between a mask of humor. Rather, though, as the book states, they are the light. And so I just want to say thank you for this contribution to that. And so if we can give them a round of applause, please.
I know we've kept you a little bit late, Michael and I. This is what we do. So thank you for sticking with us. I want to first say thank you, Michael Williams from the Black on Black Project. You were so thoughtful in getting us to consider more and think deeper. Again, check out blackonblackproject.com. But how about a round of applause for Michael Williams, who's humble and will yell at me for doing that later. George and Ali, thank you for your words, for this book, for your inspiration. It's a gift to us all, the joy, the celebration. Remember, teachers are getting a copy. Those of you on Zoom are getting mailed a copy of this beautiful book. Thank you to the North Caroliniana Society for providing that. But thank you for this gift to both of you and for being here. Gotta say thank you to my colleague behind the scenes, Paul Benici, making it all happen. Also, thank you to the director of Carolina Public Humanities, Dr. Lloyd Kramer, who's incognito over here. I don't know anybody that loves teachers more than he does. Thank you to Flyleaf Books. And above all, thank you to each and every one of you here and on Zoom for being with us. You know, this book ends on words of action. Dear boy, black boy, I believe in you so. Let's start your story. Ready, set, go. So let me close by imploring all of you with some action. Support our teachers. Support our teachers. They are working in overburdened, underfunded systems. They are the glitter, they are the glue, they are making magic, in some cases literally with dust, and they should not have to. Support our teachers. Also, support literacy and access to books, especially books like Black Boy, Black Boy. Studies have shown read aloud time as one of the most important indicators of a child's prospects in life. We want to see children on laps reading this book. And yet, book banning is one of the most widespread form of censorship in the United States, with children's literature being the primary target. This is happening right now in North Carolina as we sit here and talk tonight. We all need to help make sure our voices are heard, that joyful, celebratory, beautiful books like this are in the hands of every child, in every classroom, in every library, because that benefits us all. So again, thank you for being here. Ready, set, go. Good night.